So with that reading, we'll call upon our brother Trent. And again, his remarks this morning are born blind.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We have, or I should say I have read this chapter, I don't know how many times. I've talked about it very many times. Some of you have talked about it, so maybe you're thinking, do we have to go over this again? And yes, we do. I always think, and I apologize to anybody if I've not paid attention during your talks on this and am repeating some of the ideas that you have brought forth on this chapter. But I guess even if I think I've exhausted my knowledge on this chapter, when I read it again, other things come up. So I'm going to talk about it again. John chapter 9. So let's consider this man who had a birth defect, a very serious one. So he has been blind his whole life. We don't know how old he is, but he's old enough to be considered an adult. So this man, for the first time, is about to experience vision, which seems, vision is something, it's hard to explain to a person that's blind, or that's been born blind, right? How do you tell a person what color is? How do you explain what the color red is, for instance? It's pretty hard to do to a person that can't see. You probably wouldn't even bother to describe color. You might describe shapes, and he could feel for himself what things were shaped like. But a lot of things about vision you could not describe to a blind person. But if you were there, and during my talks, when I ask questions, I want you to answer, okay? So I'm about to ask a question, and you can raise your hand and answer. If you were there and you knew that he was going to experience vision for the first time, what advice would you give him? Okay, that's a question. What advice would you give this man that is going to experience vision for the first time? Sharon?
Thank God.
That would be good. Do you thank God every day for your vision? Well, maybe that would be good advice for yourself then, as well. Any other advice, Joni?
Don't be afraid to ask for help, because there are going to be so many strange things going on now.
Right. It might be overwhelming, right, to all the things that you are now going to experience through vision. What advice would you give him about vision? Would you say trust everything that you see now? Or what? This is your experience in life. Have you trusted everything that you saw? Or have you experienced things that you said, my vision has failed me? What would you say about that? Michelle?
I would say trust vision more unless you're sleepy.
So Michelle said, trust your vision unless you're very tired. Sherry.
If you're a Jew living in Jerusalem at the time and you knew about Jesus and he gave you your vision, you could, and you knew the law and stuff like that, you could see the wonders of God that have been talked about and told to you all your life.
Right. So Sherry is saying there's some things that you could go see or experience that she would recommend based on what God has told you through the law and just in general, there's things that you could see. Have you ever driven down the road on a hot day and it looked like there was water ahead on the road? Yeah. And when you get there, it seems like you never get there, right? You never get to the water on the road because your vision has failed you in that case, right? There's something happening that isn't really there. It looks like water, but it is just heat waves coming off the road. So you can tell the person there are things you can experience where your sight doesn't really help you because it's an illusion, it's not real. And so like Sherry was saying, is there anything that you would recommend this person to see right away or things not to see when you're talking to this man and advising him on his newfound vision? What would you tell him to see now that he has vision? What? That's a good one. Dan says you would tell him to look for Jesus, and which he does apparently, but he's unable to recognize him, which seems odd because you know, you always hear that people that lack one sense are heightened in other senses. So when Jesus does come and talk to him, you would think he would know his voice just because he would have heightened sense of hearing, but he doesn't seem to recognize Jesus' voice. But Jesus does tell him who he is. Beth?
That's what I was gonna say. When my mom was blind for a while, before she died, and I was gonna say what you said about the heightened senses. So if you flip it, so you learn to rely on the other senses, right? And they are heightened for whatever reason, which I think sometimes it's God given. But then if a blind person comes, you have to tell them, I would tell them to flip it the other way. Don't just rely on your vision, because I think the first sorry, this isn't exactly the answer. Not just rely on your vision, but remember all the other things that you know and all the other senses, and use those. And the other thing I was gonna say is.
Okay, just interrupt for a second so I can explain. Beth is talking about her mother that was blind at the end of her life, and how her senses were heightened, and you have to explain to people to depend on those senses. I guess I'm getting there right, I hope. Yeah, what else?
The other thing that I remember my mom said, the thing that she missed the most about her sight were her family and friends not being able to see her. So maybe the opposite would happen with this man. To look for, I think first things he would look for are friends.
Right.
And people's faces, because
Right.
that's what my mom was saying she missed most.
So that's that her mother missed most, being able to see faces of friends and family and loved ones. So concentrate on that. Maybe would be good advice. Mark?
My advice would be don't lose your faith, because faith is believing without seeing.
Right, that's a good point. Mark said, don't lose your faith, because faith is more about believing, and which is what the word means, of course. And seeing is not necessarily an act of faith. In fact, Jesus says to Thomas, who said, I won't believe it unless I see it. And Jesus said, "Blessed are those who haven't seen it yet believe." So those are a lot of good comments. You haven't really said what you would advise him not to see. Is there? I remember one time I was traveling back from college to home, and there was an accident on the road, and just it's a 2-lane road, so you went around, the police were waving people by, and I made the mistake of looking at the car and seeing a dead person, which was not a good sight. I would recommend, to this person with new vision, don't look at things that you'll be sorry that you actually saw. And you can kind of anticipate places where you shouldn't really look at things. Anything else that you would advise? Yeah.
Living in the Roman world, he'd have to ignore what he saw being done to his people by the conquerors.
Sherry says the Romans, he might have not wanted to see the things that the Romans were doing to his people. Yeah, there are things like that. Sometimes things are hard to see, but they should be seen, right? Like several must have found it hard to watch Jesus' crucifixion, but they went there anyway and witnessed it. I don't know if this man born blind was there or not, but that was a sight I'm sure most people would not want to see, but was probably good for them to be there. So that's several things. It's just good to think about, someone actually getting their vision, and we have vision, that we could take our own advice for all of these things. But as I read this again, there were a couple of things that became clearer to me. One is that Jesus says at the beginning of this, it is not about sin. We're not trying to decide who sinned, whether this man or his parents. And, we've gone over this before anytime we've studied this, but it's about the works of God being made manifest through him. So God is trying to show us something by healing this man through his son. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that this is a Sabbath day, right? We find out later in the story that he is healed on the Sabbath. So God is actually working on the Sabbath. Jesus says that at the start of this passage. We have to work while there is light. And I think this probably, we know it is one thing that really annoyed the Jews, that he was healing on the Sabbath. But Jesus says plainly here that God works on the Sabbath, right? Which is, it seems odd because God says he rested on the Sabbath. And so he wants men to rest on the Sabbath. But here, Jesus plainly states that, in fact, he wants you to realize that you take the Sabbath day to see how God works. And you, in fact, can work on the Sabbath day as well. But use the Sabbath day to see God's works, which is an odd thing when you consider the Sabbath. That's the day God rested. But Jesus plainly states that God is working on this day, and that they should do good works in his name as well. And contrast that, and if these chapters are going chronologically, the chapter before, chapter 8, is when Jesus had a serious conversation with the Jews. In fact, at the end of it, they were going to do a work on the Sabbath day. And what was that? When Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am, what work were they going to do on the Sabbath day? Say that louder. Yeah, they were going to pick up stones and throw them at him. That seems like a work to me. Seems like serious work to go and pick up stones and throw them. But Jesus, it says he passed through the crowd and he mingled among them and he was pretty much hidden, which kind of goes with this chapter, right? That they were blind to where he was. They couldn't see him because he didn't want to be seen. And another possible work done on the Sabbath was by the blind man himself who walked to the pool of Siloam. And I don't know if Jesus did that on purpose or not. But it may be that he sent him, there's a Sabbath day's journey that the Jews determined you could only walk or travel this far. And I'm not even sure how far it is these days. Does anybody know what a Sabbath day's journey is?
I thought it was 1,000 steps.
1,000 steps, Bruce suggests. And it might be. I wonder if Jesus is making this man walk more than 1,000 steps, just to show that God does work on the Sabbath and good works are possible to do. So he makes him walk to the pool of Siloam, and it seems like Jesus could have easily cured him on the spot, but he makes him walk maybe out of faith for this man to demonstrate his faith, and maybe also to demonstrate to the Jews that they are not Lord of the Sabbath, but that Jesus is. And Jesus will heal on the Sabbath whoever he wants. He'll create new people on the Sabbath. Another thing I noticed this time is, so the man goes, washes his eyes, and now his sight it's come to him. He makes a statement that I think is good, really good, and it's true, and it is that nothing like this has ever happened. No one knows ever of a man born blind being healed. And that's still the case today. You cannot cure someone who has been born blind because there's a certain passage from your eyes to your brain that has to be established very soon after you're born. If it isn't, it will never happen. Your brain says, okay, I'm not getting any messages from the eyes, it cuts them off. It says it's never going to happen. So once it's established that there's no messages, your brain says, okay, I'm not going to bother consulting with your eyes anymore. So no one has ever that has been born blind, even today, that I know can be healed of that problem, but Jesus did it. And so the man makes a statement that is still, as far as I know, true today, that you cannot establish that link to your brain if it has never been made right in the beginning, right from birth. So that's an interesting statement by him, that he would say that, and it is true medically even today. The second thing is his walk back, and I don't know what all he saw on the way back to the temple, but what is the one thing he's amazed by when he gets back? what is the one thing? I think the King James says he marveled at something. So all these things that he saw on the way there, there's one thing he marvels at, and what is that? Is it the Grand Canyon? Or is it the temple once he got there? What did he marvel at? So that didn't stick out to you very much. It was something that you wouldn't think, would be something, but because of his sight, let me get the right verse here. I was hoping that you would help me out and just find it and read it, but okay, chapter 9. Yeah, verse 30. So they said to him in verse 29, "We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Why, this is a marvel. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes." So out of all the things that he saw, he said, this one is a marvel. You think you know where Moses came from, yet you have never seen Moses. You don't even know, firsthand that Moses was sent from God. Yet here I am standing in front of you, and he opened my eyes, and yet you don't know where he came from. This is a marvel, he said. This is one of the things where his eyes were opened, and he said, he didn't look at the temple and say, this is a marvel, or, the mountains around Jerusalem. He said, your stubbornness is a marvel to me. My eyes are open to what kind of ridiculousness is going on here. We don't know where he came from, and yet he opened my eyes, something that no one has ever done. So all these things, they make me think then that this man is born blind, and so I think all these things are, of course, given for our benefit. So what do we take from this? I mean, we can see, most of us here, but I think that is the point, because in the end, Jesus says to them, to the Jews, you are blind, but you don't recognize it, so you don't come to me. I could heal you. I could heal all of you. Of your blindness, but you don't recognize that you're blind. You don't come to me and ask for healing. So therefore, what can I do? I can't heal you if you don't even think that you need healing. And I think it's the same for us, right? That we are actually born blind. There's a lot in this world today about how people are born. Some people want to deny things about the way they were born, and others want to justify the way we were born. There were songs out when I was a crazy youth, I guess. One was like Born to Be Wild, and you might know that song. And there's one Born Under a Bad Sign. All things like, this is the way I am, and I was born that way. and maybe justifying the way we act. But this chapter is about a man that obviously could not deny the way he was born. He was born blind for sure. And he was healed from it. Not that he was declared a sinner, not that he, could make commentary on being blind. Anyway, God was justified or unjustified in what he was. It was all to give glory to God, that he was healed, and the way he was born didn't really matter as far as sin was concerned, because he was healed. And Jesus did this to show that God still works in people. And I think we maybe are born blind, and we can look right back to Adam and Eve. Why would I say we can look back to Adam and Eve and see that we were maybe born blind? That is, again, a question. Because at one point, what happened to their eyes? Right, their eyes were opened at one point, which is a strange statement, right? You think everything was good because God said that it was. But in Genesis chapter 3, and we know that they could see, right? And in verse 6 it says, "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked." So they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And we know that God said everything was good, right? He said he looked over his creation and saw that everything was good. So in his eyes, everything was good. And now Adam and Eve eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And somehow they knew then that there was something wrong, right? And what was wrong? What did they find out after they ate? What is it that they knew eating the tree? They knew that they were naked, right? Somehow that was okay before. God looked at that and said it was good. But now, after they've eaten of the fruit, they see that. And if it's knowledge of good and evil, before they ate, everything was good. And now that they ate the fruit of the tree, being naked, I take it to mean was evil, that it was wrong, that there was something wrong in being naked. And there ends up being curses and statements. They're not all curses. There's hope given after that. Then it's an interesting thing, and I really don't know what to make of this exactly, but after the flood, Ham viewed his father. It says in chapter 9 of Genesis, verse 22, "And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. And those two brothers didn't look upon his nakedness." But it's interesting that the same thing kind of happens with Ham. He sees the nakedness of his father, and he's cursed. His offspring are cursed. Canaan's cursed. So I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but he saw something that caused him to be cursed, maybe because in his fleshly state he saw something and he was not put off by it, but it appealed to his flesh. And I don't know what it was exactly, but we know who the offspring of Canaan were. They were the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, which Abraham was told to inhabit, and that his seed would push out all those inhabitants. So somehow people's eyes are opened during their lifetimes, which makes me think, again, that we are all born blind, and that we have to have our eyes open not only to who we are, not only to understanding our flesh, but also to see greater things, to see wonderful things that we can benefit. So the man born blind did come back and finally had his second encounter with Jesus, this time with his eyes open. And Jesus is very encouraging to him. He tells him that he is the one that cured him. So that is in verse 35. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who speaks to you." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. So he does end up he sees that Jesus, and I think it's interesting that Jesus says, "You have seen him." And I think he's talking about even before his sight was given to him, that he had seen Jesus. He had seen Jesus in faith, and like Mark said about Thomas, or was talking about faith, I think that's how we are supposed to act as well. I do truly believe we have been born blind, and it takes our faith in God and his Son to open our eyes, and then we can see wonderful things. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen's defense and followed by a stoning. And again, the Jews get so upset when people speak about Jesus being the Messiah that they can't control their rage, and they end up stoning Stephen. It says in verse 54 of Acts chapter 7, "Now when they heard these things, they were enraged, and they ground their teeth against him. But he, full of the Holy Spirit, gazed into heaven and saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing at his right hand. And he says, "Behold, I see the heavens opened, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." Do you think Stephen actually saw this? Yeah, I do. I think he actually saw this. Do you think we could see this? I think so. Maybe not as intensely or in quite the same way that Stephen did, and maybe we could. Maybe if we had faith like Stephen, and to the point of even dying for our master, we could see him in that state. Sometimes we see things, and as we talked about in the beginning, our vision, our memory of what we saw fades, and we don't remember correctly. But I think that's why we meet here every Sunday. That's why passages like this are put before us, so that we can see, so that we can take this bread and wine and see our Master Jesus sitting at the right hand of God, that our vision would be cleared up, that our eyes would be open, not to how frail and sinful we are. I think that has already been established, just like it was with the man born blind. We don't talk about, who sinned, because we know everybody sinned. We talk about the works of God and how he makes known his works through his Son. So when we take this bread and wine today, I hope we remember that, to look to the heavens and see our Master, to have a new vision of what is really going on, our eyes open to Jesus sitting at the right hand of his Father. And we aren't, I don't think one of these hymns is Amazing Grace, but the words of Amazing, and we don't have to sing it, so don't rush to change the hymn or anything, but remember once one of the verses in there says, "I once was blind, but now I see." Let's be like that and say, yes, I was born blind, but my Master Jesus has healed me.